really a groundbreaking new way of working together to manage aquatic resources on a permanent and a cooperative basis. So LBD emerged from intergovernmental agreements, or IGAs, that were the result of 2 water diversion projects. Both of those projects have impacting rivers here in Grant County. And those 2 are Denver Water's Moffett project and then Northern Water's Windy Gap Firming project. So both of those IGAs established a long-term partnership of cooperation, not conflict, among the groups. So while LBD is already underway and working together, we will become fully implemented with the added resources of funding and enhancement water and also operational flexibility following construction of the Moffett Collection System project and the Windy Gap Firming project. So you'll see on the slide that more than $10 million are earmarked for LBD projects through those IGAs among the parties to LBD. So agreements with Denver Water and then the Northern Water Conservancy District, those include commitments for funding and timing through the permitting and the other milestones. And those agreements also earmark funds for specific activities. Some examples of those are stream temperature monitoring, aquatic life, riparian health, and a few others that we're talking about. In addition, Denver Water and Northern Water have both agreed to release water at critical times to help those rivers and streams in Grant County. And they also have agreed to allow their water collection systems to be used to benefit the environment here in Grant County. So the LBD partnership emerged through the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement, or the CRCA. And that was a 5-year negotiation that became effective in 2013. So part of the agreement established these long-term partnership between water providers, water utilities, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, entities that you see here, and that's called learning by doing. So the management committee, the role of that committee is to oversee learning by doing efforts. And the management committee includes 1 voting member from each organization that you see listed on this slide. And then the technical committee, their role is to advise the management committee on LBG activities. So all of these parties have committed to building a stable, cooperative, permanent relationship that respects the interests and the legal responsibilities of each organization, while at the same time working to achieve the goals of this cooperative effort. So learning by doing's goal is to manage aquatic resources by protecting and, whenever possible, restoring and enhancing aquatic environments. And again, we are focused on the Upper Colorado, Fraser, and Williams Fork basins here in Grant County. And you'll see a map of that area later on. So as we know, Grant County's river basins are a major source of water for Front Range water providers. And through this collaboration and through this cooperation, the learning by doing partners are really finding ways to maintain healthy flows for fish and healthy flows for wildlife, while at the same time meeting those diverse needs, which include the municipal water demands. And this photo that you see is of restoration in the Williams Fork. That's the Kemp Breeze State Wildlife Area. So what we do, so learning by doing uses the Grant County Stream Management Plan. That's our guide, and we use that to prioritize projects. So all of the learning by doing partners, we work together to monitor river and stream health, and we use any operational flexibility that we have available to us to address any issues that arise. And Jessica will be talking about monitoring, how we monitor that river and stream health later on. So basically we learn by doing, and try to capture the results of our efforts, along with how we should modify or refine our strategies going into the future. So it's a fluid process. And then the photo on this slide, this is of a riparian revegetation project on the Fraser Flats area. And this was where a lot of volunteers worked to revegetate 1 mile of riparian stream bank corridor. And about a half mile, 0.4 miles was open to the public once this project was concluded. This project included a revegetation component and also a stream restoration, an in-channel stream restoration component. And then got some new public fishing access in Grand County. I think that's the end of my slides. You'll hear from me again at the end, but I'll pass it off to Jessica Alexander, and she's going to talk about monitoring activities that Learning by Doing does.
Thanks, Anna, for that great introduction. So as you saw on an earlier slide, the LBD group is made up of a management and technical committee. And so the work I'm going to talk about is actually come out of the monitoring subcommittee. So it's a technical team within the larger group of technical experts that we have on LBD. And so I help to lead the monitoring subcommittee as a co-chair along with Kaylee Folk with Grand County. So to dive in, the Learning by Doing monitoring effort is really centered around a schedule each year of producing a monitoring plan of all of the different areas that we want to monitor in our cooperative effort area, and then also what types of monitoring we want to conduct each year. So some examples include stream temperature monitoring or aquatic insect or macroinvertebrate monitoring as a couple examples. And so we put together these very thorough plans each beginning quarter of the year. And then we hire consultants as needed in order to collect the monitoring data. We also use resources from the other partner entities that are part of Learning by Doing who are collecting data as well. And so we're able to really pool everyone's efforts and cover a wide geographic scope. So the culmination of all that planning and actual field monitoring is put together into an annual monitoring report. And so here's a couple of snapshots of the reports that we produce, and we kind of summarize all of the monitoring results in a snapshot table, and then we summarize notable events of the year in a short narrative. And so we've been collecting data for 8 years now, and the reports that we've produced so far can be found on our website, and the link is available on that slide. This is a picture of some volunteers with Learning by Doing and the Colorado Trout Unlimited Headwaters chapter who are assessing the health of willow plantings that we planted along the Fraser Flats. So that's another example of some of the monitoring we do. So next slide, please. Okay, so as Anna mentioned earlier, our guiding framework for all of this monitoring is really the Grand County Stream Management Plan. And the requirement to have an aquatic resource monitoring plan stems from the intergovernmental agreements, or IGAs, that Anna mentioned. So our goals with the Aquatic Resource Monitoring Plan are to really foster an understanding of the resource, aid in our decision-making, to identify changes in the aquatic environment, and to also look at critical stream reaches. Every year we do a gaps analysis or an assessment of existing monitoring to determine if we need to add additional sites or additional frequency of monitoring at certain locations based on the results from past years. So, some other goals we have are to prioritize action steps and to evaluate the effectiveness of restoration efforts that we do. This is a picture of John Ewart with Colorado Parks and Wildlife in the middle of an electrofishing fish survey on the Fraser Flats. And the graph below is hard to read, but it's an example of an output of continuous stream temperature data at one of the sites that we monitor. And the red boxes above the blue data show the state temperature thresholds or the state temperature standards. And so, again, that's an example of some of the data that we look at as the subcommittee. So next slide, please. Okay, so big question, where does LBD monitor? So this is a big map with a lot of small data points, but the point of this slide is to really emphasize that we cover a large area in the headwaters, and that includes 229 monitoring sites, and the data is collected by 11 partner entities. So folks like Denver Water and Northern Water, but also Grand County Water Information Network and like the Bureau of Reclamation, are others. And so the areas that we're focusing on are the lower Colorado River from the Blue River up to the Williams Fork, what we're calling the middle Colorado River from the Williams Fork River to Windy Gap Reservoir, the upper Colorado River upstream of Windy Gap Reservoir to the headwaters, including the Three Lakes area, the Fraser River and tributaries, and then the Williams Fork River and tributaries. So next slide. So what does LBD monitor? So here's an example of some of those constituents that we are looking at each year in our annual monitoring plan. So things like existing stream conditions for water quality, water temperature, sediment on substrate in the river bottom, aquatic insects, fish, and flushing flows. And we're also looking at the success of restoration projects like Learning by Doing's Fraser Flats River Habitat Project that was constructed in the fall of 2017. So like I mentioned earlier, we have volunteers that can go out and not only help us plant willows, we also get a volunteer crew to help survey the condition of the willows each year. So that's another example of some of the monitoring that Learning by Doing does. These pictures show a segment of the Fraser Flats. If you haven't been out there, this is near the public fishing area, and you can see the top photo shows an over wide, really shallow river, and the conditions were around 30 CFS at the time of the photo in September of 2017 before the project. And then after the river restoration project, we used equipment to narrow the stream channel, create deeper pools and better habitat for fish. And around using the photos, you can see at around the same flow, this is 40 CFS in the after photo, you have a much different river, a river that is able to function more closely to a natural system. So great success with that project. Next slide. So what has the data shown? So I'm going to share a few examples, but not all of the examples that we have, because I could probably talk for much longer. So some examples of data that we recently collected in 2020, I'm going to share some about the aquatic insects of the macroinvertebrate community. So for the Colorado River Basin section, including the Williams Fork, we had 13 sites where we did macroinvertebrate sampling. Learning by Doing hired a consultant, and they went out and were able to do sampling for the bugs in the river. And they found that all but one site was in attainment with the state standards. So they look at things like diversity of the aquatic insect community and also count of the bugs. And so they're looking at things like mayflies and stoneflies, And so the one site that was not an attainment was upstream of the Windy Gap Reservoir. And so that's actually the location of the restoration project. And so this is really informative data to understand as a baseline condition before the larger restoration connectivity channel project happens. So very interesting. Overall, the 12 attaining sites where we collected aquatic insect information are supporting healthy macroinvertebrate populations. So that's really good to see. The one site below the Williams Fork Dam on the Kemp Breeze State Wildlife Area actually showed improvements in 2020 following a stream restoration project that happened in that area in 2019. Next slide. So here's a summary of water temperature that we observed in 2020. So I want to preface this by saying we did not go into an extensive analysis. This is simply a look at the continuous stream temperature data for sites on the Colorado River Basin and the Fraser River Basin, where data was available and where we were able to compare the continuous data to the state standards. So if you remember back to that slide where I showed the graph of the blue line of data and then the red temperature standard, that was the comparison that we were doing. And so this is just kind of a high level look at the stream temperature data to see, are there exceedances happening in the cooperative effort area? And so it's kind of a great high level view of conditions. So we found for the Colorado River Basin in 2020, while we didn't have data from all the sites where data was collected, we didn't have any stream temperature exceedances. So that's really positive news. In the Fraser River Basin, including Ranch Creek, we had 34 sites where data was collected and where we compared it to the state temperature standards. And here's where we started to see some exceedances. So we had 6 sites that exceeded the state temperature threshold for acute or one-day exposure, meaning high temperatures that happen over a 24-hour period that could start to affect the quality of life of the aquatic environment. And so those sites were Ranch Creek and Meadow Creek, St. Louis Creek, and Herd Creek. And then we had 3 sites that exceeded the state temperature threshold for chronic or 7-day exposure. And that's the more concerning exposures, that long-term, weekly high temperatures that can start to affect not only bugs, but fish as well. And so those sites included Ranch Creek and St. Louis Creek. And for these sites, we really saw high temperatures in, end of May and June, and then also in the shoulder season as well. And so, we're closely monitoring these sites every year, and it's helping to inform our decisions as a learning by doing partnership. Next slide. Let's see, another example were flushing flow conditions in the cooperative effort area. So flushing flows are intended to move sediment downstream. In the Grand County Stream Management Plan, there were sites recommended for flushing flows in the Colorado River Basin and in the Fraser River Basin. And in 2020, we were able to meet all of the recommended flushing flows at the 13 sites. So here's an example photo of the Denver Water Ranch Creek diversion. And so flushing flows happen when Denver Water releases water that would otherwise be diverted into the collection system. Instead, the water is bypassed or flushed downstream, and it's intended to mimic those natural conditions, create more oxygenation in the water, and be beneficial to aquatic life. Next slide. And so what's next? That was a glimpse of some of the findings that we're starting to see, but as a team, we really want to understand comprehensively what is happening in the watershed. And so our plans are to do a comprehensive analysis of all the available data, the 8 years of data that Learning by Doing has collected. We're going to work with our partners to collect any data that they have. And we want to do a watershed scale assessment to really understand, what trends are happening. Are there critical areas? Are there gaps in our monitoring? How can we do better? How can we learn by doing? So that is what we have planned next. And Rachel, I will pass it off to you. She's going to talk about one of the exciting projects that we have planned for this year.
Great, thank you, Jess. That was really informative. You covered a lot in a few slides, so very impressive. And thanks, Holly and the Headwaters Center for hosting us. Really appreciate it. And Anna for setting us up so everybody understands what we do in general. Appreciate it. So did want to talk a little bit about this project that Learning by Doing is leading. It's the Cabin Creek Aquatic Organism Passage project. So AOP is Aquatic Organism Passage, as you see here. It's a really exciting project located on Cabin Creek, which is a tributary to Ranch Creek. There's the figure here on the right of the slide. It's kind of small, but you get a general feel for the location. Like I said, tributary to Ranch Creek in the Fraser River. It's located along Forest Service Road 128 in the Fraser area. The project really is being pursued as this collaborative effort that is LBD by all of the partners, and everybody has been contributing a great deal to this project that has been a part of LBD and the partnership. The goal is really intended to improve and protect habitat connectivity and fish passage for the native Colorado River cutthroat trout and other aquatic organisms. As I mentioned, this cooperative effort, we've all put in a considerable amount of time and effort expended by the partners to evaluate, design, procure, fund through grants and other sources, permit and authorize and construct the project. The construction is still coming up, but we've gotten through about 80% of the project elements to date, which I'll describe in a few minutes on a separate slide. While each LBD partner had a significant role to play in review and approvals at each milestone, some of the key contributions I've listed here on this slide included Denver Water did survey of the area and survey of the stream and culvert for design purposes. The Forest Service really came to bat and completed the required NEPA review and authorization through a special use permit. NEPA, if you're not familiar with it, is the National Environmental Policy Act, and issuance of a special use permit for the construction activity. Forest Service also did the engineering design work of the culvert design. Colorado Parks and Wildlife and Denver Water provided review of that design to make sure that it was acceptable according to current engineering specifications. The procurement aspect, which was much more challenging than any of us anticipated, but that was led by Trout Unlimited, and thankfully they came to bear to lift through that heavy process, which was procuring all of the equipment and materials needed for the project. Well, the equipment and materials included not only the culvert and footers, but we're going to be needing aggregate and rental of heavy equipment as well, along with other erosion control devices. Trout Unlimited also was successful in securing grant funding through the Fish and Wildlife Service, which covers about half of the costs, about half of the costs of the total project cost. The remaining funds, excuse me, my partner in crime is barking. The remaining funds we acquired through the U.S. Forest Service through their maintenance funds. So we were lucky in that in total, the total project cost, which I'll discuss in a few more minutes, was covered by these grants and maintenance funds. And finally, when we get to construction starting, we're aiming for September 1st construction start. when we do get to that construction start date, Denver Water's source of supply, we call SOS, our construction crews will be doing that construction. Grand County is also providing aggregate and road base from the Benson Pit location, at least that aggregate that meets specifications. We may have to get other aggregate from another location, but at this point, Grand County will be contributing that aspect. And finally, Forest Service and Colorado Parks and Wildlife will be performing fish removal at the project site prior to construction. Next slide, please. So going to review a few of the project goals and benefits of this project. A little bit about the existing road crossing. We'll see some pictures of that in a few minutes, but really the existing road crossing consists of 2 corrugated metal pipes installed in the early 1970s. They're the traditional round corrugated metal pipes. One is a 54-inch diameter culvert. The second pipe is a 40-foot long, 36 by 40 inch arch corrugated metal pipe. We'll see pictures of those, as I mentioned. There's no concrete head walls or wing walls associated with it, although there are some large boulders placed alongside those culverts. And it's right under Forest Service Road 128. And the culverts are approximately 20 feet wide. The creek is about 10 feet wide at this location. What we aim to achieve with this construction project is replacing those 2 culverts that cross Forest Service Road 128. It's also called the Waterboard Road, if you're not familiar with it, over Cabin Creek. We will be installing a new AOP arched culvert that will provide improved fish passage for the trout and amphibians that I mentioned before, as well as improved sediment transport. Concurrently, we're going to also be removing a stream measurement flume that's located approximately 100 feet downstream of the crossing and reconstruct about 20 feet of the stream channel in this location. As I mentioned, the benefits of the project include removing barriers from the existing culvert and flume to fish migration up Cabin Creek. The new culvert also provides a nice natural stream channel bottom and provides that habitat connectivity for migration for fish species and amphibians. And it accommodates a higher flow for sediment transport. Next slide, please. So this is a very simplistic graphic that I put together to kind of show that the stepping stone and milestones to success of this project. It really starts from the bottom up, starting with project conception in the spring of 2020. While LBD was engaged in conversations in 2019 about this project, in 2020, we really launched the effort to progress implementation of the project. So there's been a lot of steps along the way to get to where we are today, really. Each LBD, like I described before, each LBD partner offered resources to get us through these several, what turned out to be fairly complex steps in the design and engineering and construction of this project. We're currently in that phase, that second bullet down with the asterisk associated with it, the construction pre-planning phase. This phase that we're in now involves the final permitting steps to authorization, coordination with contractors that we've procured and gotten on board under contract. They are developing the culvert and footings at this point. We're preparing the public notifications that will be issued fairly soon and signage that we'll be placing out at the site to indicate road closures and detours and other information about the project. We will also be doing the fish removal and salvage activities fairly soon. The construction crews will do the standard weed treatments and other post-project restoration planning that we're getting ready for. Construction is planned for approximately 4 to maybe 5 weeks in length. We're anticipating starting the project construction September 1st through early October. There will be some on-site pre-treatment steps occurring in late August. So you will see crews out there if you happen to be up there. Regarding total project costs, I mentioned some of the funding before through the Fish and Wildlife Service grant and Forest Service maintenance funds. The total project cost at this point is we're estimating at about $110,000, funded, like I mentioned, wholly through those grants. Of course, this doesn't include all of the in-kind contributions that we're committed to through labor efforts by each of the LBD partners. Those labor efforts included, like we mentioned, design, procurement, management of the project, and now coming up, construction of the project. Some of you may be thinking, how is this project going to impact me if you're trying to access some of this area near Cabin Creek crossing at this Forest Service Road 128? We will be publishing a public notice about it, which will include a road closure map and area vicinity map. So that will be coming with the public notice to be issued this month, or sorry, in August. This month is already almost over. So that will be published soon, along with maps published at key locations along the roadways. In general, just so you guys are prepared, if you're up hiking in that area, a lot of people use the Devil's Thumb trailhead located right near the actual project location. So the road, Forest Service Road 128, will be closed for about a half a mile just south of that Devil's Thumb trailhead location. So you cannot access that trailhead if you're coming from the south on Forest Service Road 128. So you will need to access that trailhead, which will remain open, but you'll just need to access it from the north on 128 from the north. Again, these maps will be published and posted in lots of locations, so the information will be available. Okay, next slide, please. Return into some photos so you can get an idea of what we're talking about. This is some current conditions, existing photos of the Cabin Creek culverts that we just described. So there's two culverts that are existing there on the left side of this photo frame. Those are obviously over conducting water from Cabin Creek under Forest Service Road 128. The photo on the left also showing some existing conditions with people kind of walking over the Forest Service Road over those culverts. The new AOP culvert, mind you, is just one arch culvert with the natural stream bottom. Stream bottom will be quite large and will take up the place of those two culverts, but we'll be showing some pictures in just a second to show you kind of what it looks like. So next slide, please. So these slides, I'll have a few slides that we'll be showing in a moment, but this slide in particular shows a completed example of another AOP culvert project that was completed a few years ago, the Vasquez Road AOP project. This was installed in 2019 and into 2020. It included replacement of the older culvert, which you see on the left side of this photo frame. And then the new culvert was installed in its place. That's the construction activities are being shown on the right here. As you can tell, the construction involved bypassing the water around the work site is needed. You can kind of see the size difference here and in the next photos between the existing smaller culvert and the new arch culvert that was replaced or that was put into the location. Next slide, please. These are just some ongoing construction photos from that Vasquez Road project. Again, showing the size differential with the new culvert. The bottom left picture shows the footers that I had mentioned earlier. Those are concrete footers that are placed, poured offsite, brought to the site and placed to allow the bottom of the culvert to rest in. Those are buried, of course, but you can see how large they are. So that's why we need some rental equipment to bring those in and place them in the appropriate spot. Next slide, please. This is a good photo on the left-hand side of this photo frame to indicate or show you the natural stream bottom that's being placed in the bottom of this new arch culvert. This again is the Vasquez Road project example that was completed a few years ago. And then you can see on the right side of this frame where the bottom has been placed, and now we're placing the dirt over top the culvert to allow access over the road again. Next slide, please. And this is the completed Vasquez Road project, which will look similar to the project we're working on right now, the Cabin Creek project. The culvert has been buried. There is a natural stream bottom. You can see some of the large boulder placement alongside of the culvert to help reduce with erosion. And then water flowing from and through that culvert on the right side. And the last photo, I think this, is this the last photo, Anna? I'm not sure if it is. Okay, great.
Yep, this is your last slide.
Great, thank you. So I think we should either pass it to Ed unless anybody has any specific questions now, or we can hold them till the end. Let's go ahead and move on to Ed. Thanks, Ed.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. That was a great description of the Cabin Creek project. And again, I know a lot of people access that area, but just remember, construction's only temporary, and it's all about the cutthroats. So anyway, I'm gonna talk about how learning by doing responds to river conditions within Grand County, and really talk about what are some of these tools that learning by doing has today, specifically with Denver Water and Northern Water, until their projects are either approved and operating, and that being the Moffett project, gross reservoir enlargement. And then on the northern side, well, the municipal subdistrict would be the Windy Gap Firming project in Chimney Hollow reservoir construction and operation. So I'm going to start out with and I apologize, I don't have a bunch of slides. This is it. I'm just going to talk about a bunch of points. So with Denver Water, really we have a lot of voluntary bypasses, and Anna and Jessica talked a little bit about those, and specifically targeting flushing flows on various tributaries and creeks on the Fraser River, especially from that Moffett collection system. In addition to these voluntary bypass flows, there's also a number of construction projects that Denver Water does on their Moffett collection system. In the past, those construction projects were just timed, and they were done in the schedule that best fit Denver Water. Well, through learning by doing, we instead looked at partnering with Denver and to request that those construction projects be done later in the summer. So by way of example, this summer there's a project that starts August 21st, so there'll be bypass flows to the Fraser River, and these are the times of the year that we need more water in the Fraser. So those are a couple tools that we use with Denver. And over the last 6 years, we mentioned we started learning by doing, I believe in 2014, ahead of when we were required to start learning by doing. But over these years, those voluntary bypasses for Denver Water has resulted in over 1,200 acre feet of bypass flows, and over 5,300 acre feet of that coordinated timed construction project bypasses. The other sort of tool that we're using right now, and it's much of the West Slope partners, including Reclamation, the state of Colorado, Denver Water, Northern Water, Middle Park, the Colorado River District, and some other West Slope entities, is the Shoshone Outage Protocol. And that's really, as folks might know, the senior water right of the Shoshone power plant in Glenwood Canyon. It's a 1902 right. It's 1250 CFS. So basically the Shoshone Outage Protocol, or SHOP as we call it, it basically honors that water right when the power plant's down and inoperable. So there would otherwise be that call on the Colorado River. So everybody acknowledges the plant's down, but we're still going to send 1200, make sure there's 1250 CFS that hits the .0 gauge. And why that's important for Grand County is the water flows through Grand County. Moving on, I want to talk about Northern Water a little bit, or the municipal subdistrict of Northern Water in particular, and some of the tools that are used for response to river conditions. And right now, they also do voluntary bypass flows from Windy Gap. They're also doing flushing flows at Windy Gap. That's part of the Grand County's 1041 permit, as well as the Windy Gap Firming Project intergovernmental agreement. Also on tap, hopefully with a completion date sometime in 2023, is the Windy Gap Colorado River connectivity channel. That's going to be a tremendous tool for learning by doing in all of Grand County, really shrinking the footprint of the Windy Gap Reservoir and building a connectivity channel, the main channel of the Colorado River around Windy Gap without any federal litigation to do that. It's unheard of. Also, with regard to Northern Water, we have an agreement whereby Grand County can participate in pumping of Windy Gap and store that water in Granby Reservoir to be released later in the year when the Colorado River needs it the most, and make those releases for environmental purposes. Northern Water was also a significant partner in creating the 5412.5 acre foot pool. That's 5,412.5 acre feet of water that's stored in Granby Reservoir in perpetuity. And that's significant for us. 20 CFS of that water is being released today to supplement the flows on the Colorado River now, and 35 CFS, it'll be ramped up to 35 CFS beginning August 1st. And those flows, that 5412 water typically starts August 1st and goes through September. Also, there's several significant buckets. I just wanted to note that once Chimney Hollow Reservoir comes online, there's significant numbers of buckets in storage in Granby Reservoir for Grand County and Middle Park water that will be utilized in the future for additional environmental flows and releases for the Colorado River. Anna touched on the $10 million in projects for learning by doing, but I also want to acknowledge that these buckets that I'm talking about, the value of water and storage from the Windy Gap Firming Project, in addition to the value of water and storage from the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement and Denver water tied to the Moffett project, that total is $165 million of benefit. And then lastly, with Northern Water right now, before Chimney Hollow comes on, is again the Shoshone Outage Protocol. They also participate, and we call that SHOP. So I want to give an example of how our Learning by Doing Operations Committee has communicated and responded to an issue. And a good example is this summer. As everyone knows, Grand County has been in extreme drought. We came off a very poor winter with snowpack. Really, we're just in a dire place, and it was early in the year. We saw a very warm May, an extremely warm first week of June. So these concerns were raised by the Operations Committee as well as the co-chairs on weekly and biweekly calls. Then on June 5th, it was a Saturday morning, Don Meyer, he's our Operations Committee head with the Colorado River District, contacted our Learning by Doing partners regarding the high stream temperatures that were in that section between the confluence of the Williams Fork and the confluence with the Blue and the Colorado River. These stream temperatures were way too high for that time of year. And so immediately the Colorado River District was able to release 50 CFS out of Wolford. As well, Denver immediately started bypassing 100 CFS on St. Louis Creek. Also, the Denver Water created additional bypasses on the Upper Williams Fork. Later in that week, the June 7th through the 9th, we asked Denver Water to do even more. They bypassed flows on Ranch Creek as well as Vasquez Creek, and also addressed, like we talked about earlier today, the flushing flows on Cabin Creek. Those total bypasses throughout that week were an approximate, an additional 350 CFS that hit the Fraser and ultimately the Colorado River. At the same time, Northern Water, or the municipal sub-district, was pumping Windy Gap. That minimum flow coming out of Windy Gap is 90 CFS. However, Northern Water participated and they ramped up those releases from Windy Gap and kept those at between 200 to 300 CFS. So, you know, those downstream, that would help address those downstream temperatures that we were trying to address and mitigate. At the same time, Northern Water was working with some of our irrigator and partners that are outside of the area near Kremling, the ILVK group. We found that the KB ditch gauge on the Colorado River was not reporting correctly. So there was an additional 20 CFS gained from correcting that gauge at the time. We had several other meetings. I believe June 15th was one of the last meetings to address this particular issue. And at that time, Denver Water started releasing water out of Williams Fork Reservoir because, you know, to address those issues on that section of river below Williams Fork, that cold water that comes out from Williams Fork really has a tremendous impact on temperature in that section. And they started releasing water out of Williams Fork, and it went from 17 CFS up to 120 CFS during the day to make a huge impact. And we had a lot of guides, and you know, it didn't just impact the water temperature, but it also helped out guides in that section and down below in the wild and scenic section, as well as the rafting community. Let's see. I also want to move on to really, you know, taking a look at what Denver Water and Northern Water did. In essence, is they lost yield to their projects. We're used to seeing water put in a pipe, it goes east, and it's stored in a reservoir. Well, with these releases from Denver Water, Gross Reservoir didn't fill, and I don't think Ralston did either. But that yield Denver lost was approximately 11,000 acre feet, and that included the shop operations as well. From the Northern Water or municipal subdistrict side, they lost a total of around 7,600 acre feet of yield, and that also included those shop operations like we were talking about. So to end, I'll try to wrap up here, and I just wanted to let everyone know that Grand County Learning by Doing is working. We're doing a lot of great things for the aquatic environment in Grand County, and as I stated before, well before starting in 2014, then the CRCA and the Windy Gap Firming Project required that Grand County LBD establish. Without LBD, we wouldn't have Denver Water and Northern Water at the table with Grand County and our LBD West Slope partners to cooperate and collaborate on so many important water matters in this county. And especially we wouldn't have these voluntary bypass flows and flushing flows. Grand County and the West Slope, we've sure come a long way from the days of being part of East and West Slope battles and digging our heels in, and the East Slope digging their heels in, and really not being able to address anything in Grand County or any of our issues. But today, through learning by doing, it's continuing to build relationships. It's rolling up our sleeves. It's hard discussions. And it's getting things done with a common goal to address these issues in the Fraser and Williams Fork basins, as well as the Colorado main stem. So thank you, everyone.
That was wonderful. Hey, Anna, did you want to have any questions or anything that you guys want? And does anybody want to ask the panel?
I'm Ingrid, and I'd like to ask Ed if there were any measurable help with all the Front Range precipitation they had this spring. Did that help fill their reservoirs? Does anybody know about that?
Anyone? Did you guys hear that?
I did. I'd like to defer to Denver Water on that question. But as I was talking about, and I'll just real quick, I'll talk about, with some of those voluntary bypass flows, they were not able to fill Gross Reservoir in Ralston. But as far as the rains and our state was definitely, East Slope was much different conditions than the West Slope, for sure. We had, extreme drought in Grand County, where the East Slope was not experiencing that. But it also, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel and Jessica, that lessened your demand at the time.
Yeah, Ed, I think that you encapsulated that right, and Jess will probably add a few statements as well, but you're right, the East Slope didn't experience the significant drought for as long as the West Slope did. Yet we stuck with our water conservation, education, and outreach, and really worked towards conservation as a key contributor to reducing the amount of usage during that period. And like Ed explained, we worked towards timing some of our construction projects at the appropriate time so that the impact would be less, and that we could time releases at the time that the river needed the additional flows. Jess, did you have any other thoughts to add?
Sure, I was just going to add that although I can talk to our collection system experts, and they probably have way more to say, but in general, something to keep in mind is that the drought that the state is experiencing as a whole is reducing soil moisture in the watershed of all of our reservoirs upstream of those collection buckets. And so we are seeing that in the last few years, since we've experienced drought conditions, less water is running off and reaching the reservoirs, especially along the South Platte, which, we experienced lots of rain, but not all of that runoff is actually making it to the reservoirs because it's kind of getting sucked up like a sponge. So these are persistent long-term problems, and one season of rainfall or snowpack is just part of kind of the long-term trend. And so we are like watching, storage very closely with kind of a long-term frame of mind.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ingrid, for the question.
Does anybody else have other questions for this fabulous panel?
I have a question. My name's Lisa. I'm just wondering, and Ed might be able to answer this a little bit better, if there's anywhere that I can find like an environmental assessment that looks at all of the development that's going on in Grand County right now and how that's going to impact the watershed over the long term. And then I know there's proposals to increase transbasin diversions, and I'm wondering if there's anything that looks at how those two things are going to interplay with each other over the long term for the watershed.
That's a good question, Lisa. I do not believe there's any environmental assessments that are applicable to development in Grand County. However, there are environmental assessments on both the Moffett project and the Windy Gap Firming project.
And what level of development do those two assessments for the Moffett and the Windy Gap Firming project look at? Like, there's so much construction going on right now. And I know there's been a lot of development in really sensitive areas, especially like with the Rome development going in outside of Winter Park, what's going in outside of Granby in some sensitive areas. Like, at what point in time do the Windy Gap and the Moffett assessments look at for development in Grand County?
I believe the answer is they do not.
No.
So the environmental assessments for both the Windy Gap and Moffett projects looked at increasing storage on the east slope for anticipated demand on the east slope. And so I think what you're talking about, Lisa, is localized development in Grand County, and has there been some holistic assessment of the impact of all of those developments occurring at once? And that's a really good question. I don't believe, to my knowledge, that there's any kind of large scale assessment that is happening.
I would add to that, if I may. There are sections in the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement that were negotiated in Denver Water through the CRCA, will be providing water to several of the Grand County water users group, which includes entities like Grand County Water and Grand County Water and Sanitation District number 1, which is the water provider for the town of Winter Park in downtown, not Old Town. And so there were several. There's also 375 water. It's part of the Clinton water that also benefited Winter Park Water and Sanitation District, as well as the ski area. So through the CRCA, there were negotiations surrounding providing additional water for the town of Winter Park and some of the water and sand districts.
Okay, thank you. I guess that brought up, Jessica's response brought up another question for me. And I'm just wondering, those EA, those environmental assessments looking at projected demand in the Front Range, do they look at ways to promote conservation in the Front Range and how to like drastically reduce water demand?
Yes, they do. I can speak for Denver Water's final environmental impact statement. So yes, it looks at demand forecasted out, and then there's also a fixed service area. So the idea being, we are doing our best to project demand needs out into the future, but then also limiting development to our service area and not allowing for just unrestricted development. So the intention of the Gross Reservoir Expansion Project is to not only provide for that increased demand, but also to provide additional reliability to our water collection system. And that's due to the imbalance in our collection areas. So we have a very large collection system in our south system, but a very small one in the north system, which is where the Moffett Tunnel provides water from the west slope to the east slope. So the idea of behind a lot of those environmental assessments was conservation, looking at ways to educate our water users to reduce demand over time, how to look at incentive programs like getting a little feedback, how to look at incentive programs like upgrading fixtures, and also smart development like brownfield development in downtown already urban areas. And so yeah, that's kind of touching on a lot of the different aspects of those environmental assessments. So I hope that I answered your question, Lisa.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
I'd like to add something on that. This is Ingrid again.
Mhm.
A lot of your homeowners associations require Kentucky bluegrass, and it's always a topic of conversation about how so much water is necessary to run that. I mean, when are people going to stop that? It's drying us out horribly. We had the horrible fires because of it, and we're concerned about our groundwater.
Yeah, and I'll speak to that, Ingrid. That's a very valid point, and something that Denver Water is concerned about as well. And Denver Water participates and contributes to the discussion with the city and county of Denver and other regulators that help set the rules and regulations for development and landscape and aesthetics types of regulations and rules and that kind of thing. Denver Water doesn't have control over that, yet we understand that that's a one of the contributing issues to demand is the use, residential use of water, including lawns and other kind of landscaping activities, in addition to other residential uses of water inside the home. So that, going back to Jessica's comment, that's one of those topics that we really have committed to and engaged a lot of energy and focus on over the years, and particularly in the last few years, knowing that the state is in a severe drought situation. We really focus a lot of energy on our outreach and education to our customers to really, while we can't enforce certain things, we really can progress the educational focus around proper landscaping, proper watering measures, other conservation aspects inside the homes as well. So, you know, we definitely hear you, and we've heard that comment and work towards helping our customer base really reduce their use in terms of conservation focus. We have seen, we know that it was a wet year, at least on the east slope this year, but we have seen a drastic reduction in demand, primarily because our customer base, we feel, has been better educated about conservation practices and smart watering principles and other measures. We have a ways to go, and we're continuing to educate that customer base. What we also do is communicate with our other utilities that are providing water: Aurora Water, Northern Water, Colorado Springs Utilities, and other entities that have the same issue they're facing. And there are a lot of collaborative work groups on the east slope with these utilities that focus on conservation and education around conservation.
Well, I have one more comment to make on that, in that you all in Denver, the Front Range, pay less for water than we do up here. And in fact, it's because of the concentration of toxic metals that Fraser water and now Three Lakes water are going to have to put in expensive plants in order to get out copper or whatever it is. And we think that Denver should be charging more for their water. They're not paying the real cost of water.
That, you know, we can bring that comment back to our rate group, their finance group that sets the rates. And I hadn't heard that comment before, but that is an interesting comment that we can bring back and explore further.
And I'd like to add a couple comments, Ingrid, to the water conservation part in irrigation. And, you know, this is something that learning by doing, we've been discussing over the last 5 years. We've had some really difficult conversations with Denver Water and Northern Water about the topic. At the same time, I have to give Denver Water credit for their conservation program and where they've taken it since the 2002 drought. They, and I don't know the statistics, but I believe that they have reduced their consumption by somewhere over 20% in that time period, and they're continuing to do more. We constantly have the conversation with them, because yeah, you drive down to the city and you see water that's getting sprinkled, and it's on the sidewalk and in the street, and that's, you know, absolutely what they're trying to avoid, in educating the public and cracking down on those violators. But we've had some great conversations. They've actually included the West Slope and the Colorado, Fraser and Colorado basin into their drought planning, and acknowledging our conditions as they move forward. And so it is something that we have addressed a lot with Denver Water and Northern Water. And yeah, I just wanted to add those comments. And then, you know, I'm not a water utility provider, but I would imagine it's a lot cheaper to produce water when you're doing it for you know, millions of people in a very dense population versus very few people.
That's true. I mean, on the face of it, our customer base is 1.5 million. So we have a volume of ratepayers in. So that does play partially into the rate structure.
I'm wondering,
Oh, I was going to follow up to Ed's comment. You know, thank you, Ed. And just in terms of accountability, Denver Water does a presentation at least once, probably twice a year, to Learning by Doing, to update the partners on the latest conservation statistics. And so, yes, we can certainly get those and share them. But the point being, rather than pointing fingers and placing blame on what the problems are, we've decided that it is more productive to actually come together and see what we can do. You know, we don't have the power to influence every you know, citizen of Denver's decision, and no one has that power, but through education, through the right land use practices, through coordination with the city and changing those HOA standards where we can, you know, we are making progressive change, and it's small and incremental, and but it's trending in the right direction.
And I would add, Jessica, I think, you know, the Learning by Doing partners, we had a lot of comments for you in the last couple of years, and I believe you have responded to some of those, and especially through your communication out to all your users through, is it TAP?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. TAP.
So for those that are listening, maybe we could get that plugged into the chat somehow, but there's a lot of good information that comes out of TAP, and I forget what that stands for, but in, you know, for Learning by Doing, we sort of say, hey, it's all the folks in the city that if you conserve water during the week, you recreate with that water on the weekend in Grand County, and it's sort of you know, and just also acknowledging, you know, the different conditions between the Front Range, especially this year, in a wet year on the Front Range and a dry year on the West Slope, and really getting the information out there to all the, you know, to the city about the difference in conditions and where their water comes from.
thank you. And it's Ingrid again. I appreciate that you included us in your drought management plan. And that seems huge. But I'm wondering, as the East Troublesome Fire really messed up northern system, are you preparing for the possibility of a fire in the Denver water system?
That's a great question, and Jess probably has some thoughts to add to that too. We did experience a fire in the last year, the Williams Fork fire, that you probably are familiar with, and that's obviously in Grand County and within Denver Water's watershed in our collection system. So Denver Water is working really closely with Grand County. Grand County is doing a lot of effort in post-fire rehabilitation, particularly in that area. But Denver Water, U.S. Forest Service, Colorado State Forest Service, and other partners are contributing to not only helping with the burn area assessment in that area, but planning for projects in the near term and long term to recover from that fire, because that burned area is around some of Denver Water's diversion structures as well. But more importantly, it impacted a lot of the Grand County landscape. So I feel like the team that has come together is working really closely to contribute to some of the rehabilitation of those areas. And we are learning a lot of lessons through our communications with Northern Water and their recovery efforts that they're going through because of the East Troublesome Fire. So I think good elements about that are being shared, particularly because Learning by Doing also has a post-science fire research collaborative work group that we've established, where all of the utilities and other Grand County and other LBD partners are coming together to share some of this post-fire recovery activities and lessons learned from those, particularly those huge fires that were really impactful, so that we can prepare for this year and future years.
Okay, thank you guys. I do have one last question from Dan Lubar. He asked just briefly if the panel could let us know about GC WIN, which is Grand County Water Information Network's role in supporting the process, working together with Learning by Doing.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. And I can put a link to GC WIN's website in the chat in a moment. So GC WIN stands for Grand County Water Information Network. It's a 501c3 nonprofit, and it is in charge of housing water quality data for Grand County in its database. And so in addition to being a scientifically unbiased organization that houses water quality data and provides it for public use, it also has a tremendous education program where it actually goes into the East and West Grand high schools and does science education programs surrounding water. And it actually, Mary Price is the executive director, and she works with Holly at the Headwaters Center on youth education. So ages as young as, I think, 4 to probably teenage years during the summertime, putting on education programs and hands-on kind of science experiment type of activities for them. So I will put their website in the chat, and so you can check them out. But they're a great organization local to Grand County.
Yeah, they're a great partner of ours. So thank you for giving them a plug. So thank you guys. This was wonderful. I think I have one more message here. No, I think it's just you guys just have.
Yeah, Kathy Finland, I wanted to just say something.
Sure.
Okay, sorry. It strikes me that Headwaters River Journey and Headwaters Center does offer tremendous front range training to understand the complexity of water use and what front ranges people are doing to Grand County, and also second homeowners. And so I would hope that somehow our participating organizations, for instance, the panelists, would help promote that concept of Headwaters and what it, the experience of the Headwaters River Journey is quite compelling and able to, particularly with younger people, to understand they make a really big demand on their parents. And so I think particularly with younger people, but also with people, older people who really want to begin to understand all of these impacts. And so it's a great way to, for all of the organizations to maybe help Headwaters Center with its mission.
Yes,
Wholeheartedly agree.
Yep, agreed. And yep, Denver Water did work with the Headwaters Center in its development. And so a lot of the messaging there, we also give to our customers in our TAP publications and our short videos. So yeah, we're doing our best to duplicate the message that you can find at the Headwaters Center in Denver Waters publications.
Actually, I'm going one step farther because I do know of that tremendous help that was provided. Actually, I'm thinking that it would be helpful if Denver Water would urge visitation to the Headwaters River Center. So just such a easy way to begin to understand these implications, because conservation, increased conservation or more efficient use of water is always going to come from better understanding of, you know, what your personal responsibility is. And I think Headwaters River Journey does that, but it's like going one step further with actually communicating, go visit, and incenting that visit maybe. So,
I think that's a
but I
great,
do want to say thank you to Denver Water and to everyone, the panelists, everyone participated in the creation of Headwaters River Journey and the accuracy and the facts.
well, I think you're exactly right too, Kathy, you know, helping incentivize folks to actually visit and learn, you know, in real time at the Headwaters Center, particularly because like you had just mentioned, many second homeowners live in Denver, but recreate and live up in Grand County as well. So I think it's really critical to make that connection that, you know, this is where our water's coming from. And it is a great, I see Holly smiling. We're helping you market this because it is a great opportunity for learning.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Kathy, for the
Yeah.
great plug, and thank you.
Always working, always working.
That's great.
And thank you to the panel, and you guys are all our great partners. And I think the more and more that we consistently push the message and we do the education through the center and through all these wonderful organizations, I think we'll continue to get the word out. I mean, I constantly am seeing more and more people coming through and more people worried. And there's a lot more awareness about what's happening right now with water. And we're about to launch together with the county, the drought preparedness plan too. And I think, again, that's really good for people to understand. You'll even see more and more water conservation information coming out. So thank you so much to the panel. I appreciate your time. This will be, again, this is recorded. This will be put on our website at headwatersriverjourney.com. You can go to Water News and or to our calendar and actually go in and see all the this recording plus other previous speaker series. Our next one is on August 19th at 3 o'clock, and the topic is going to be One World, One Water with Metro State University, and they're going to be talking about their partnership with the private sector and schools in higher education and what they're doing too with also promoting the same type of mission we all are. So thank you with all of that. And
Holly, excuse me.
yes.
Can I relay some water news?
Yes, please do.
Just yesterday, I'm with the Upper Colorado River Watershed Group, and just yesterday, $15 million from Northern as mitigation was put into our grant foundation for us to do reparations on the rivers and the riparian areas. We're excited to get going with that, and we just want more people to know about that.
That's wonderful. Actually, I'll go ahead and look for more information. If you have something that's readily available, please go ahead and send in to me too, and I'll get it out to a lot of folks. So that'd be wonderful. Good news. Yep.
Holly, that's you saying that, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Anything else, everybody? Okay. Thank you so much. Take care, and everybody have a good night.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Take care, guys.